February 23rd, meeting of the Bartown Board of Adjustments to order. Have a roll call, please.
Hey, Todd's here. Culhane,
Here.
Hansen,
Here.
Stein,
Here.
Brink,
Here.
Letsky. Present. Kays. Dolly, Dargis Johnson, and Ford are absent. We have a quorum.
All right. Thank you. First thing I'd like to do is make a note that there will be an opportunity for open public comment for any item that's not on the agenda. So if you'd like to speak later in the meeting, please see Jill. She'll get you signed up. First order of business then would be the approval of the December 5th, 2019 minutes.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Minutes approved. The next item on the agenda, the Robert and Pamela Drake, item 20020.
The owner applicant is Robert and Pamela Drake. The property address, it has none as of yet. It will be determined upon issuing permits, but it has access onto Highway 20, Highway 139/North Lake Drive, or 450th Avenue. Those are potential access points. This is a conditional use request. Staff finds that a campground is a listed conditional use for the C3 Highway Commercial District per 28038. The definition of campground is a plot of ground for public use upon which two or more campsites are located, established, maintained, advertised, or held out to the public to be a place where camping units may be located and occupied as temporary living quarters. Campgrounds for tent trailers and recreational vehicles should be cited with consideration for access to the property. The campground should be designed to minimize the impact from adjacent major thoroughfares. The applicant submitted written request and a conceptual site plan for the proposed campground. Said drawing reflects compliance or non-compliance with the following terms of the ordinance. Section 210202 2B7 through 7A through H is specific rules governing individual conditional uses, and this includes the board's review of ingress-egress, off-street parking and loading, refuse, utilities, service areas, screening, buffering, signage, exterior lighting, required yards and open space, and general compatibility. Signage and exterior lighting were not addressed in the letter or plan. Chapter 2163, off-street parking and loading requirements and engineering design standards. The submitted plan does not define off-street parking spaces for passenger automobiles. However, it just shows spaces for the RVs, but there is sufficient area for all kinds of parking there, so that shouldn't be a problem. The ordinance section 190412 is off-street automobile parking spaces, and it requires that off-street parking spaces shall be provided at the ratio of one parking stall for each sleeping accommodation in any automobile court or tourist home and each camp unit in any automobile camp. Chapter 2165, outside storage and display requirements for specific uses. The submitted documents do not indicate plans for outside storage or displays. But in the C3 zone, outside storage may be permitted if acceptable screening is provided and approved by the building official. Merchandise which is offered for sale, rental, or lease may be displayed beyond the confines of a building. Chapter 2173, landscape and lighting standards. A minimum 122 trees are required on the property per the submitted site plan and survey. The minimum tree requirement is the number of trees to be located on the development site or lot shall be one tree per 50 feet of frontage. So this is a very large frontage type lot. So then we move on to the fact that the applicant is not seeking variances at this time from anything. And that would include sidewalk, trail, curb, gutter, which is not shown on the plans, but they're not seeking any kind of variance. And all outside dumpsters or other garbage receptacles, I will remind you, must be screened by an opaque fence or wall. Title 24, subdivision of land, Both annexation and zoning petitions were approved by City Council and became effective on January 11th of 2020. So this board must consider if satisfactory provision and arrangement has been made concerning 210202 2B7A through H and Chapter 2176. If application is endorsed, conditions of approval must be specified as compliant administrative permits may be issued without return to this board. And just of note, I did have one person contact me in opposition of the plan.
Did they provide any details, or they just said they didn't like the idea, or did they provide any content to their objection?
It was various, mainly the ingress egress part being on South Lake Drive, I would say. And again, just keeping control of people that don't reside there permanently. So, you know, control over noise and trash and whatnot, things like that.
Okay, thank you. I think as everybody remembers, this item was on the agenda a few weeks ago, and we got into a lengthy discussion, and many people came up and spoke pro and con. And so I think we have a pretty good idea of what we're dealing with here. Since that time, Jill, have you received any new information that would, be relevant to the board here as far as what we should know? That's changed since the last time we had this issue in front of us?
As far as complaints, I've only talked to that one person, but I will recommend that Mike Lawrence just kind of update you. We did receive this plan that is a little more detailed and shows things like showers and toilets, potential ingress, egress, the treed area, which is a buffer, and they did talk to DOT also. And DOT was reluctant to give it any access without a more concrete plan.
All right.
That's access onto Highway 20, not any of the city streets.
Correct.
Mr. Chair, I would add too that, and I believe that the last time this was considered, that was prior to this piece of property becoming annexed and zoned. I think there was that we're going to consider the conditional use first. So since then, as a formality, that has occurred. The property's been annexed and zoned.
Okay, fair enough. Anybody have any questions, comments for Jill?
Mr. Chair, quick question. Under your staff report, chapter 21.73, could you just remind us what the curb and gutter requirements are?
Well, curb and gutter is to be put in before any kind of permit is issued on a construction.
Is there curb and gutter anywhere on South Lake Drive right now?
I don't believe so.
Would there curb and gutter need to be done if these are not public streets but only private access points?
Heath?
Keith?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Commissioner Case. No, this would not be a situation where that curb and gutter regulation would be administered. That is strictly relating to the public streets and any building permits we would issue on lots adjacent to those public streets. We require that curb and gutter to be installed so that we know the elevation of that structure that's getting built meets the minimum height requirements above the curb.
Would the appropriate, if this was to move forward, the appropriate recommendation that a waiver of right to protest a gutter project along South Lake Drive be warranted if South Lake Drive was to be rebuilt with curb and gutter?
That's a fair question. I'm trying to think of a scenario where that would be necessary or beneficial to secure that waiver of right to protest. If we were to come through and reconstruct North Lake Drive, the city, and make it an urban section rather than a rural section that it is today.
It'd be a special assessment type project?
It likely would, depending on the scenario. Sometimes communities will do a reconstruct like that and pay for it completely. Sometimes it'll be assessed on a special assessment on a per lot basis.
And there is trail that runs along the lake side of this property, so we wouldn't need that portion would not apply, but only those areas along the county or the state highway, again, waiver right to protest, if that was similar to what we've done in past for other types of projects.
Are you talking about that road that runs,
Well, the property that, I mean,
runs it?
along Highway 20, plus then the road that takes you down to Compesca
Yeah,
Lodge.
that's what I meant here.
Are we looking requiring sidewalk along those stretches of road per ordinance? I mean, it does require it per ordinance.
Yeah, another good question, and generally speaking, the decision-making on components like that would come subsequent to this at a site plan level, where we would be looking at those items, those requirements of the subdivision regs and the zoning ordinance, and ensuring that they're all followed. Now, in a situation like this, it's a campground, whether we would require sidewalk or not, and whether there's existing pathway and how that pathway expansion or extension is planned out in our long-range pathway plan. All that would be checked off too and reviewed.
So if we were to move forward at the end and it was to be approved, there probably would just need to be some sort of reference to working with staff on final site plan and sidewalk trail provisions.
That would be a fair assessment from my perspective.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, because right now too, I'll add that on that street, that North and South Street, what is that? What number is that? On the west side. So that's a rural section right now, so we wouldn't have sidewalk requirements. And that entire right-of-way hasn't been platted or dedicated to the city at this time. And North Lake Drive, when we work with the platting process, the North Lake Drive has already been dedicated to, so we won't have to dedicate any right-of-way when we plat this property.
Any other questions for Jill? Jill, do you have anything else? Okay, I'd like to open up to a public hearing. Again, I would just remind that we've covered a lot of this before, and out of deference to and respect of everyone's time, I guess what I'd like is the proponent to come up first and certainly provide a wide degree of latitude for the time, and then the main opponent, the speaking voice of the opponent, if there are any, would certainly allow them a fair degree of latitude for time. But after that, I guess I would like to keep things moving. So if you have something new to add, you're welcome to come up. Please keep it limited to a couple minutes so we can keep things moving, and everybody might has a chance to speak their piece if they so wish. Please say your name.
Mike Lawrence. I represent Bob and Pamela Drake. Since last time you had mentioned, if it has anything changed, me and Bob kind of got together and we spoke about having a campground liaison, somebody there that will call the police if something gets out of hand. As a business owner and as a property owner that rents, and both with Harry's and my apartments, it's our policy that we don't get involved. We call the law enforcement. We have rules and regulations in this community that these people are going to have to follow as well. I wouldn't want somebody to go out there with a group of people if they're drunk and rowdy. I wouldn't send myself. I wouldn't send anyone who's not trained out there to do that. I would call the police, and the police would take care of it at that time. So that's one thing that we are willing to do. We do ask that as, it's over 10 campers, where we'll designate one of those campers to, hey, you're the person. We also, Emily Bublitz, who lives across the street there, she's worked with the GFMP. We're working on a deal with her as well, where we can maybe give her some of the, a percentage of whatever comes in for the campground so she can keep an eye on it. Again, we're not going to have somebody that'll go out there and stop something from happening. If something illegal is happening, if the noise ordinances are getting broke, if the laws and the regulations of this community are getting broke, we call the police. And that's how we're going to look forward at that. That's the same thing they do in City Park. They have a teenager there that has a radio. I talked to Kirk Ellis, and he told me that they have a high school student that has a radio. It goes straight to dispatch. If there's an issue, he calls the police. As far as the plan itself, these campground or these camping spots are 3,000 square feet. That's 50% above and beyond your minimum. We also looked at, can you turn this on? This, you can kind of get the gist from there. But so what I did is I took the area around City Park, and we used GIS mapping to figure out the density of the city-owned camping spots. Then we divided it out per spots per acre. This size is a lot larger as far as the acreage is. You know, it's 16.5 versus 11.2 acres that we came up with, but the density is very similar to the city-owned campground. So, I mean, one of the issues that somebody had brought up to me is that it seems like there's a lot there, you know, and even with our business model, which, you know, it can change. You guys have to look at this as a campground in general, not as a business model. But we anticipate some of these campsites being rented by one person renting one or two or more campsites, or having control of. So that's one of the things that we're looking at. I did, Bonnie, I talked to Bonnie and she told me to look at a campground up by Big Stone. So I did print this off, which is kind of a similar layout of campsites. You know, we feel like we want to build something that's going to be positive for the community, and we're going to be putting in quite a bit of infrastructure into this thing. I mean, our plan right now is for each spot to have sewer and water and electrical on site so they can hook up. It's a permanent campsite.
That sounds like a trailer.
Could you talk about the ingress and egress a little bit? I know that's a big concern.
I would touch on that as much as I can. I talked to the DOT, and they control 2 out of the 3 roads that go on the side of that. They control 450th as well. So they would not tell me until I had a complete site plan. The email even says that you might find this to be the chicken before the egg. We're willing to work with ingress and egress. If you look at the plan that we provided, most of those campsites, those campsites are in areas behind the buffer the best we could. We are trying to do what we can. It's difficult to make everyone happy.
Speaking of that, of the concerns that were raised by many of the local residents the first time we were here, I know that the noise complaints and, you know, the rowdiness and other issues with regarding control, you know, crowd control, I guess, for lack of a better word, were kind of a repetitive theme. Mm-hmm. And the campground liaison, I think, you know, worked toward that. Are there any other concerns that were brought up previously that you have dealt and discussed with some of maybe the local neighborhood and tried to, you know, reach some sort of compromise or address?
You know, it got to a point where I don't think there was going to be a win. You know, we have, if you look at what we've done, we've put it behind the buffer as much as we can. There's a lot of people who just don't want a campground there, period. You know, and that comes into property rights, and we don't have to go down that road. But we're trying to develop something that hasn't been developed in this community. You know, I can't remember the last time we added a campground. I'm not probably in my lifetime. At the same time, I don't think that should prevent another one from coming. You guys have rules and regulations that every campground should follow, ordinances that every campground should follow. If you think those need to be changed, if you think there's new issues that are going to be arised, change that ordinance. You have the power to do that. But you can't ask Walmart to do something that Target doesn't have to. And that's one of the things that I want, you know, to portray. We can do other things with this land. There are other plans for this land. There's a list of C3 uses that are currently acceptable on this property. I think that this is a good use of this land. It draws people to the lake. which is important for the commercial exposures out there. It also gives people in the community a chance to utilize an asset that's there for everyone. So as far as trying to figure out and trying to solve everyone's problems, you know, that's something that you guys can do through ordinance changes. If you think that there needs to be more protections on campgrounds, change the ordinance.
All right, thank you. Anything else to add, or there was the last open?
Mr. Chair?
Yep.
Mike, could we put the site plan? On the site plan, the yellow dots, does that denote lighting?
Yes, but I am not a lighting expert, so I put yellow dots where I thought yellow dots should go. I'm going to ask an engineer's help on that because, you know, that's what
Generally
should be
generally
done.
at the intersections and turning is.
Correct, yeah. You don't want light pollution. Campers don't want a big light over them all the time either.
So you would also alluded to the idea that there wouldn't be necessarily a dump station that people would connect to a sanitary sewer.
Per your ordinance, I have to have a dump station still.
Still would have some, okay. And then as far as do you have at least 122 trees on site?
If not, our commercial site plan will denote that we have 120 trees.
Are you looking at planting trees also near the campsites so that there will be
Correct, yes.
shading?
There will be quite a few trees added.
Are you going to comply with all 9 points of the campground regulations as they currently sit?
I would like to see in the next meeting one of them changed. And to be fair, it's one of the only private campground that is in our community currently does not follow that rule. So I think it's a rule that should be looked into anyway.
As written, and you're aware, are you going to comply with all 9 points of the current campground?
I will comply
ordinance?
with the ordinance.
The other quick question, though, is even though it's not in the ordinance, would you have any problems denying individuals to keep campers there year-round?
Denying them to keep campers there
So
year-round.
let's say come November, everybody has to remove their campers, so it's not a camper storage area.
I would ask you if you feel strongly about that and you think that needs to be in the ordinance, I would ask you to change your ordinance and I would follow that ordinance as it was wrote.
If the ordinance was to change subsequent to an issuance of the permit, would you comply with it even after the fact?
Yes, I would, yep.
Thank you.
As long as the ordinance is changed. I want to be fair to everyone. I want my rules to be the same rules as every other campground has to follow. And I don't think that's something that's not fair to ask.
One last question, Mr. Chair. If the DOT was to allow access points to Highway 20 directly and an access point to 450th, would you look at configuring your site layout so it wouldn't have to access North Lake Drive? Or is that essential to your site plan?
It's at this point, it's not essential. Things might happen in the future that would happen to improve the area and give access to the commercial exposure directly across the street. At that point, if something were to happen, I would like to be able to have access straight to that commercial.
Sure. Thank you.
Mike, the other campground that you had an example of, was that the one up on Ortonville or?
Yep, correct.
And I'm familiar with that.
I've never been up there, just
All right.
disclaimer.
No, and that's fine. I'm somewhat familiar with that campground. It is a private entity. Do you know how many campers there? I mean, I know there are some that are there year-round. And
Yeah, I
again,
haven't-
people have built decks, and I mean, they take some pride in ownership that it's done and maintained, you know,
And
nicely.
that's part of our business model, which again, you have to look at it as a campground, not of our business model, but we are gearing towards that same direction.
Mike, with the point now that the land has been rezoned to C3, and some of the potential uses of this piece of property that would not require a conditional permit would be a restaurant, hotel, gas station, service station, those types of things.
Veterinary clinic.
Do you believe, in your opinion, is your proposal here for the campground more conducive to the environment and, you know, again, with respect to the neighbors than like one of the other previous options that you wouldn't need to come to this board for?
100% on the environment. This is going, we are hoping, you know, obviously we have to get it engineered, but we're hoping to leave the land as natural as we can. No, not filling it. Other options, we have to bring it out of the floodplain. You know, there's people that have came in and told me, well, you can't fill that land. You can fill that land. You just have to do it correctly. You just can't go in there and start dumping fill, but you can fill the land and you can build on the land. I believe that this campground is more conducive to the neighborhood. I think it's more conducive to the lake, and I think it's an addition to the city that, if we pass up, is going to set a good tone on what we want to do out there.
All right, thank you. Anything else? Anything from you, Mike?
No, thank you guys for your time.
Mike, real quick, on the eastern corner along North Lake Drive, is there any anticipation for screening? I don't know if it, I mean, given the fact that you have adequate trees or likely have adequate trees out there.
You're
know what I'm
talking just
talking
that
about.
stretch there by the city lot that the city lot's right across from?
Basically, it appears to be sort of empty, barren ground.
We had talk about putting trees. We'd like to kind of corridor the thing with trees, not just for the neighborhood, but for our campers. I mean, but trees take a while to grow, you know. So I mean, we can't pop them up that far. But we aren't anticipating putting anything there currently. That's not saying in the future that we wouldn't. But yes, our current plan on that is we're going to add quite a few trees around this area. We want something nice.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone here to speak? We're going to stay on the proponent side of it. Is there anyone here that would like to speak on behalf of this conditional permit? All right, seeing none, is there anyone that would like to speak in opposition of this conditional permit? And I guess I would just I don't know if there's a designated, you know, voice among the opponents, but if there's one main person that, you know, can again kind of encapsulate the main points, that would help things, you know, move forward. So anyone want to take that role? Come on up.
I'm not looking to represent the group.
If you're going to speak, sir, you need to come up to the microphone. And please state your name.
Mike Gaither, 370 North Lake Drive. I'm confused. I did not want to stand up and represent the group that is with us this evening. I just wanted to voice some of my own concerns.
All right, go ahead.
When a campground is being put together like this, is there a set occupancy that you assume each vehicle would have when you're figuring out a maximum capacity?
We do have minimum lot sizes for each campground site, per ordinance 21.73, I think it is, 76. And, as the plan shows, these lots are bigger than what we minimally require.
I was mainly concerned about the capacity of persons at any given time at this facility.
The capacity per what?
Persons, people.
You're wondering if we have 75 campers, are we got 150, or do we have 500 people?
Well, when you estimate, do you estimate that each camper would have roughly 3 people, or would it be 9 people or 6 people? I was just wondering if you had established something to that effect.
Mr. Chair? My understanding is that the regulations don't specify the number of individuals per camper. We have regulations in the ordinance that talks about the number of unrelated adults per residence or per household in a residential zone. But to my knowledge, we don't have any specific regulations that tie the number of campers in a camper to be located. One would suspect that it would, you know, if I have 4 beds in a fifth wheel, you could have up to 8 people theoretically.
So then it's safe to assume that there is no maximum capacity of persons on this facility?
That's correct.
Okay. Is there any anything established from either the police, fire, or emergency with concerns that hasn't been made public to us?
Like was Chip? Have you guys talked with Chip about it?
Yeah. Chip, the fire marshal, did contact us. He's at training right now, or he'd be here. But he did contact us by email and send us a concern that he didn't necessarily think needs to be addressed by the Board of Adjustment. But for instance, he would like to see the restroom shelters be also storm shelters and built to that type of code, so to speak. What else did he have in there?
I think that was the primary concern that Chip emailed us on. I would like to emphasize too that, the emergency responders, the fire marshal and the police chief, they would be involved in the site plan review for this, because that would pull together what we call our design review team. So when we get the final formalized site plan submitted, that design review team sits down as a collective group and we hash through any specific details that any one of our city departments would administer. So I myself, as a city engineer, would be looking at the final access design. The fire marshal and police chief would talk about any safety, public safety components and concerns that they might have, so on and so forth. The wastewater division of public works would talk about the sanitary sewer components. And then we give a litany of questions, comments, concerns back to the applicant regarding that specific site plan that they submitted, and any requirements for them to make any corrections, alterations to that plan so that they're in compliance with our regulations.
Very good. Last is,
Mr. Chair, just quickly also addressing your question. At the last public hearing, I did specifically, I believe, ask Mr. Chip to, I asked him about separation distances between the trailers, and he said he had no issues or separation distance between outdoor propane tanks, and he didn't think that there was going to be any issue with that, Mr. Primus, not Mr. Chip.
thanks. The last thing is, this is privately owned and probably the only one that has a neighborhood that runs between the campground and their high point of interest, which is the lake. Is this correct?
Could you repeat I'm not sure, the campground is on the non-lake side of the.
Right, and has the neighborhood running through it there, and obviously that campground, the highlight of those campers will be the lake. That's my understanding. I might be wrong, but.
I'm sure that's one of them, yes.
Okay.
Probably the case in our community, but if you want to look at a state park, Lake Cochran, down by Clear Lake Gary area would be the same thing. Of the state park is somewhat adjacent. They have some beach, but most of the camping is across from private residence.
Very good. So for Cottington County or Watertown, this would be the only privately owned with a neighborhood running between the lake and a campground.
As far as I know, that would be true. Yeah, that would be true.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else here to speak on opposition of this? Yeah, please come up. Please state your name.
Hi, Leland Sutton, 420 North Lake Drive. If you could just go back to the map of the, yes, please, and scroll down a little bit. They keep talking about buffer zones between houses and the campground. I live the first house east of Kempesca Lodge. That road that exits and enters the campground is going to be directly across from our garage. So every time we come out of the garage, back out, we're going to have to watch another direction. Where is our buffer zone? They're talking about putting buffer zones up to the east and what's existing there, but there's nothing established for ours except for a road. I don't feel comfortable with that. I'm sorry.
Well, one of the One of the goals of the buffer zone is more visual, you know, for that matter. But, and when we talk about ingress and egress, I'm not sure that that's actually been determined yet as far as where the actual road will be, so.
Well, every design I've seen, it has it right there, and it makes sense, because that's kind of the high ground, and it goes right close to Doris's, easy access, but it also right in front of our place. So it's not, it just makes us a little uncomfortable that potentially could be a problem for us.
Right, and I think one of the reasons for the ambiguity of the roads at this point is because that needs to be run through the Department of Transportation, and they're going to consider all of those concerns. I would, you know, that would be my expectation, yes.
Okay, thank you. That was my concern.
Thank you. Anyone else here to speak in opposition of this conditional permit?
Brent Wilkie, 440 North Lake Drive. And Mark, I know you mentioned not to bring up or beat a dead horse, but it's kind of hard to comment when you get the cart, you know, before the horse on what even to comment about. But a couple of issues I guess I have. City Park keeps getting brought up. We camped for years and years there, or not very long. I guess we moved on because of the issues there. ATVs, golf carts, I know that's an issue there. Safety issue, kids crossing the streets there. It's a problem at the golf course with the traffic. What are we going to have here? I mean, these are just issues have we looked at? One of the things that pulled us out of City Park were the late night parties. Campers pulling in, doubling up on one pad, to answer your question. Maybe these are issues that are supposed to be enforced, but they're not. And we need an attendant there because we are right in their backyard. You know, I know the issue of 4th of July cleanup at City Park. Looked like a bomb went off there. Trespassing, where are these kids going to go to get to the lake? You don't go camping to not go to the lake, I'm sorry. I guess those are just issues that, you know, not against it, but those are issues that need to be thought out. Because I keep hearing City Park, but I also, from experience, camp there, and I know the issues they do have. So that's just, you know, my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else to speak in opposition of this conditional permit?
Lynn Crowley Gaither, 370 North Lake Drive.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch
Lynn
that.
Crowley Gaither, 370 North Lake Drive.
Thank you.
More just, I guess, my concern is it's going to be built, so I just need to know how that's going to affect me. So I'm just bringing these things up to your attention so you guys can look into them. I don't know if there's ordinance for these things or not. I'm not clear, like, the months of operation of this campground. Is this like just a May 1st to September 30th, like all the others? Is that it? Or is this
Well,
year-round?
The campground would have to abide by the rules of campgrounds in, you know, per city ordinances, and as I understand it right now, it is a 6-month or approximate window.
So it'd be a May to September 30th? Because that's what I looked up on everything else. I looked up Sandy Shore, Stokes Thomas, and Memorial, and all were just May 1st to September 30th, from what I saw.
I'll defer to the experts on that.
And so that's actually the ordinance amendment that we'll be looking at for Plan Commission. But right now, as it stands in our ordinance, they're only allowed to stay there for 30 days. But we're looking at expanding that to 120 days, which is 4 months.
I saw that, and I thought I saw it's already been approved, the 100 and whatever days. But my concern more is just the total period of time from when it opens and closes
I
on
don't
the
think there's
season.
any requirement. It could be open year-round if possible. There's no requirements in them 1 through 9 on the operation.
Yeah, I can
So
get up
that's
for
one of the
that.
things I'm throwing out to you guys to think about.
And that was a question I asked Mr.
Me too.
Williams was about that.
Right.
Whether they planned on it. And I don't think he said in his business model that wasn't the intent as of right now.
It's just one of those things that I think as, residents nearby, we would worry about less if it's maybe more seasonal and it's not a year-round campground. So that's just one question I had. I know from previous meetings I was here before, there was some conversation about fencing. Is there any fencing, do we know?
The buffer zone, or the buffer.
Just the
and-
trees?
And the.
Okay.
There's that, and then required buffer of dumpsters and those types of things.
Right.
All screening is in accordance with the city ordinances, yes.
And then I was just looking at the total count of those spaces. Like when we look at all those other parks that are in the Watertown area, Sandy Shores, Stokes Thomas, and Memorial, I'm just trying to figure out, is there like an acre per number of pads relationship? Because right now, this is the largest of everything. So in terms of number of pads, it's 111 pads.
Ma'am, the requirement only addresses the size of the campsite being 2,000. The applicant has stated that their campsites are going to be 3,000. The applicant also showed a comparison between City Park and this one, and the density is the exact same. It's just bigger, but the density is the same.
Density is the same. Okay, thank you. There's no, also in previous meetings, there was conversation about cabin sites, and I don't see anything with cabins on there yet. And that whole big empty square from where the highway comes into North Lake Drive. What's the planned usage for that empty space? Yeah, that space there. Is that just not been addressed yet, or?
At this time, the applicant hasn't proposed anything for that.
Okay.
All we're here today is to
Just
take action on a
this.
campground, and this is a generally proposed outline. Once the go-ahead, if it happens to go through here, the applicant will sit down with city staff to make sure that the design, the layout comports with all of the rules and regulations of the city, at which time, if the applicant wants to throw cabins in there, that's something that he'll work it out with the staff.
I just wondered if there was something planned for that big empty space there. That's,
We could bring Mike back up later and we could ask him.
also, there was conversation about that road across from Cuts Ave being an emergency access for vehicles. I don't see anything on this plan addressing that. I was just curious if anybody knows about that. Yes, correct.
I think, again, when we were talking about that last time, we had no idea as far as what the general layout. The idea is having to have at least 2 access points. And so that was one of the reasons for that discussion about an emergency. If we only had one way in, you wanted an emergency out. And so in this situation, the applicant is showing 2 access points, which is what we would require.
So no current plan for anything there.
At this point, according to this layout, again, the layout has to be confirmed with staff.
Okay. Just another question again. I'm not familiar with ordinances and things, but would dumping from other campsites be allowed at this campsite, since they do have a dump station? Like Sandy Shores, I don't think has a dump station, right? So like, could somebody from Sandy Shores that's there come to this campsite to dump? I'm just curious. Do you have ordinances on anything like that, or?
That would be up to the owner of the campground. I mean, so commonly, I camp myself, so if we stay at Sandy Shore, sometimes
Right.
we'll go to Pelican, sometimes we'll come to City Park, sometimes we'll go to the Dakota
Right.
Sioux Casino. It would be, again,
Up to the owner.
up to the owner if he wants to have it at free or charge, or
So to be determined. And just lastly, I think would be, is there anything regarding quiet hours, ordinances for quiet hours, like other campsites I know on, I think Sandy Shore, Stokes, and Memorial all talk about, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. quiet hours? Is there going to be, do you know anything, is there anything, ordinance regarding that, or?
I don't think there's any specific zoning regulations pertaining to noise, but the city does have noise regulations that, like if you're living at your house right now, if your neighbor's crazy loud at 11 o'clock at night and you call the cops are going to show up and investigate. No different would happen here, is what I would presume.
So there's really nothing very formal?
Just as formal as it is for you right now where you live.
Okay. Wait, sorry, I do have a couple of last things. Do you know if Wi-Fi is going to be involved with this at all, Wi-Fi offering?
Don't know.
Don't know. And also, is there any city ordinance regarding drones? Do you know? Can you tell me? I'm just
No,
curious.
I have no idea.
I don't believe we have an ordinance on drones at the moment, but the FAA, if you're gonna do certain things, you need to get approval from the FAA, I know that.
Yeah, I was just curious, like if somebody comes and parks there and decides to get out with drones in the neighborhood.
I think you'd be surprised how many drones are floating in the sky right now in Watertown any given day.
I don't know, I just was curious if there were any ordinances regarding that. Thank you very much, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I would just clarify on that second to last question there about noise. There is a disorderly conduct ordinance that, so there is a formal ticket that can be cited if the police are called to the campground and somebody's causing excessive noise or the like. So.
All right, anyone else to speak here in opposition to this conditional permit? Oh.
Hi.
Please state your name.
Yes, it's Juanine Polly. I'm at 268 North Lake Drive, and I'm asking questions.
All right, Juanita, before you start, you may have missed the part when we started all this, that we're trying to keep things moving.
I understand. I
Please,
heard you, Mark.
yeah,
I
please,
got it.
yeah.
That's the rule here.
Yeah.
I know.
Okay, well,
But I think the questions are relevant.
go ahead.
So I'm wondering about when Mike talked about the sewage system, and my concern is high water and the kind of problems that we had last year and may have this year. And if all of these campers are hooked up to the sewage system, what kind of issue that may be, just to be aware of that, because it's adding a lot of people onto the sewage system that couldn't manage with just the houses on North Lake Drive last year. We had to stop using our toilets and running our water last year during the high water system, and that lasted for a long time. So,
Juanine, when was the time frame? Do you remember the time frame?
it started, well, when the water was up mostly in April. I mean, it came up, but the high water time, but was before the high water, and then it takes so long for it to drain because the whole water table, and now we know that the water table is full all over. The land is saturated.
How long did you were not able to use your?
I was not able to use my toilet for about a week, and run water, take a shower, and so on. And my neighbors, people down the road were putting, and we all put things in our toilets, out of concern, people who are lower than I am. So anybody who's higher, of course, thinks that they can use their water. But as it obviously runs down, the pumping station is over full. They put sandbags around it. And they were also actually in there pumping out the pump station into trucks to take it away because the system was getting overwhelmed. And we were using limited water and limited and not using our toilet.
Keith, could you address that time frame, and has anything changed with the system, or will these more unlikely these 100 and some sites, whatever, would not be in operation in March to April? Could be, but probably not. But is that going to cause a problem from a sewer delivery service?
Yeah, Commissioner Kays, and to the question here, there's a couple different pieces of information I could provide to the group. So the wastewater division of Public Works, of course, manages the sanitary sewer system, and when we get a formal design submittal with this, it will include any sanitary sewer design requirements that we would make of the applicant. What that would look like is, the estimated flows produced from a use such as a campground will have to be verified by a licensed engineer and provided to us so that we can anticipate what kind of a loading on the sanitary sewer system that we will incur once this is developed. We take that information and we work with the developer's engineer in assessing that to make sure that the city's sewer system is not overloaded and does not exceed capacity. So like with any commercial development or industrial development, those things are looked at very closely when we review the specifics of the design, and that's exactly what would happen here. in relation to the overloading of the system due to the high water levels, that's another component we will look at as well. It's kind of a whole separate issue that has to deal with surface water and groundwater infiltrating and inflowing into the sanitary sewer system. It's not related to the use of the system like it's designed for, but it's more related to the unexpected realities that occur in situations like this. So those are components too that we will look at closely with the design, and there would likely be some stipulations and regulations in regards to any sanitary sewer connections for these campers, these camping pads, to be connected to the system in relation to the floodplain elevation. And we know that there's floodplain throughout this parcel of land, and that will be heavily scrutinized and reviewed against to make sure that the system is not compromised because of high floodwaters.
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the things that you are, I'm sure, thinking about is forward, because this could, I mean, it happened in April, but I think across from your house, Mark, out at the lake, the road was closed for a very long time, way into June, because the pumping station still had closed the road because it still had bags around it. That was also, it didn't close the road at my place, but it was up there for months. And we know that last time the lake came up at least 3 times 12 inches over a weekend, over a 4-day period. And that was when the land wasn't completely saturated. So we may be looking at a system that is not usual. And depending on what you think about climate change, that may continue to be an issue. And it wasn't just an issue at my home, which is just down the road from this, but it was an issue for all the people around the lake too, until they got to higher areas, until there were different pumping. So I think that's an important practical issue that needs to be considered. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Anyone else here to speak in opposition of this conditional use permit? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Discussion?
Matt, would you remind me what the rule is in terms of passage of a conditional use, in terms of voting members versus present and whatnot?
It's two-thirds of the members of the board.
The total membership of the board, including absent members?
Correct. For a variance and a conditional use.
So that means what in terms of the vote here today?
5.
So in order for this to pass, there'd have to be 5 out of 6 yeses.
Correct.
All right.
I think looking at this piece of ground, this 30-plus acres, this piece of ground has been designated by our elected officials to be zoned C3, highway commercial, which has a list of 30 uses permitted and conditional. So I think, I mean, a lot of these concerns that we've heard, you know, I don't think would be any different if it was any other use. You know, I mean, I feel like people would worry about buffer and ingress and egress if it was a hotel or a farm machinery, semi-truck sales operation. But that being said, the elected officials already deemed this to be appropriate for such uses. So I think we have to look at it through those perspectives as well.
Yes, I tend to agree with Jeff, and I think if I'm picking any one of those 30 uses, I think maybe not this specific layout, but the use in general is probably the best use for the least amount of impact on the neighborhood. You know, if I had a Walmart there, it could be a hell of a lot worse than what this proposed campground would be. And it's because of that, and we've went through this process of determining from a land use planning purpose and the zoning ordinance that this is an appropriate C3 area. This is a use that's generally acceptable in the C3. I think it's the best use possible for this land of the C3 uses to have from an impact. It's therefore, I would make a motion to approve the request subject to a couple conditions. Condition number one, that the final design dealing with access and all the curb and gutter and sidewalk trail issues and all the other design issues that are associated be approved by staff in accordance with the ordinance. If there is a fight between staff and the applicant can always bring those appeals back to the board for vetting. The other condition I would look at saying is that even though while it's not in the ordinance, if the ordinance is changed to restrict the number of days a camper can be there in a given year, that the applicant would agree to that.
I'd second that motion.
So what you're saying is that, like, after November 1st, they have to take their campers off?
Well, we haven't gotten to what that ordinance is yet, but right now the ordinance just says you can't have a camper in there for more than 30 days. The campground can be open year-round. If there is a subsequent change to the ordinance, the applicant has stated that they would comply with that. If everybody else has to comply with it, he would as well. And so I'm just saying that as part of my motion that the applicant's on record in agreeing to whatever we come up with, and he said he would be.
I have a little bit of a struggle with that kind of what if that, again, this campground up in Ortonville, I'm somewhat familiar with. I contacted the owner. Believe he said he's got 78 campers that stay there year round. I think we're somewhat limiting what their options are. That if someone wants to build a deck or make it more of a year-round deal, permanent structure, and again, that's their business model. I don't know that that's for us as the board to decide. Yes, if the ordinance changes.
I guess that's all I'm saying. If the ordinance doesn't, right now, the ordinance would probably need to change to accommodate their business model anyway. If you're only allowing 30 days, we're not allowing year-round camping anyway. So if the ordinance changed, I'm not sure what that, I agree with you, Jason. I don't want to be telling you what it is.
And my thing is that the 30-day is, are we saying that they can't stay on that site for more than 30 days? Or are we saying that physical camper can't be on that pad for X amount of days? It's, to me, if.
I defer to a legal interpretation.
Yeah, and again, some of it is you got to recall, it's winter, the water line's going to freeze, the sewer's going to freeze. Year-round camping is not going to happen in our climate.
Well, and I think that you guys are getting into the discussion of the Plan Commission right now too, where I don't.
It's part of my motion, though.
But he would have to comply with whatever we amend the ordinance to. Yeah. Already, even if that wasn't a condition.
Well, no, if the ordinance is, if he was to go right now and he sticks with the 30 days and you change the ordinance, he's stuck to he's bound by the permit that he's granted today and the rules that are existing at the time. Why would he be, how can you turn around and change the law on him if we've, I don't quite understand that.
Well, the campground regulation is defined separately, so it just defines the operation of campgrounds in general. So today, you'd be blessing the ground to operate a campground.
Right.
That doesn't mean that campground ordinance can't change and that person would have to comply. Now, if it was something structurally that they put in the ground that was allowed under one version of the ordinance and then we changed the ordinance, of course, that would be grandfathered in. But if it's something that is a repeatable act or something that's going on out there that we change and put limitations on things, they would have to comply with those limitations.
I understand if you're decreasing, but if, say this rule wasn't in place, there was no 30-day or 60 or 120 days, and we give somebody a campground, and then we turn around and say that you only can operate that campground 1 week out of the year, that'd be a per se takings under that idea. So I'm looking at
pretty extreme example, but potentially.
Yeah.
And most likely they would show up for the public hearing in opposition of amending the ordinance that way.
Right, but it still could happen. And just because there's opposition one way or the other, rules change and things can happen.
And then they'd have
That's
to
all I'm
comply.
saying is that my motion, and the reason we're having this discussion is that the applicant has stated that if there was going to be some change, that they would go along with it. What that change is, it's hyperbole at this point.
Any other discussion?
I'd like to kind of point out our, probably our most common conditional use that we see on this board is daycares. And with daycares, we always often say, wouldn't it be great if there was a list of rules that we could say, does it meet these, does it meet these? Campground has that in 21.76. It lays out 9 rules that go additional, and if they meet all of those, I just feel like, I mean, that's what our ordinance says a campground needs to be, and,
Yeah.
you know.
So this should be just a perfunctory action.
That's what I'm getting at, and, you know, we've talked about that on the daycare level, but, you know.
All right, thank you. Thank you for the discussion. Thank you for all the input from the opposition and for the proponents of this ordinance. Any other, or this conditional use permit, I should say. Any other discussion? All right, seeing none, ready to take a vote on Todd's motion. Please do a roll call.
Dolly, or excuse me, Colhane.
Yes.
Hanson.
Yes.
Stein.
Yes.
Brink.
Yes.
Oletsky.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Next item on the agenda is the open public comment for anybody that would like to speak on any item that we've not already been on the agenda. Seeing none, we'll move on to old business.
None.
I don't see a new business on here, so ready for a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? We're adjourned. Thank you.